Frank Miller stood at the large window of International Space Station Delta, watching the approaching alien ship with careful eyes. As captain of the station, he had witnessed 3 first contacts before, but the Raxians were different. They rarely left their own star systems and almost never initiated contact with other species. "They're coming in slow," said Laura Jones, the station's chief medical officer. She stood beside Frank, her tablet displaying various readouts from the alien vessel. Heart rates elevated across their crew, multiple stress indicators. "Can't blame them," Frank replied, scratching his beard. "We're still the new kids in the galactic neighborhood, only been spacefaring for 40 years. The Raxian ship was beautiful, sleek blue-silver metal that seemed to flow rather than connect in segments. As it approached, its size became more apparent, nearly twice as large as their largest diplomatic vessels, yet moving with surprising grace. "Ambassador Carter wants this to go perfectly," Laura said. "The Raxians control access to 3 major trade routes we've been trying to join for years." Frank nodded. "And they're herbivores, right? Completely non-predatory species." "Yes. Quadrupedal, about 7 feet tall at the shoulder. They have these fascinating neck frills that change color with their emotions. Very sensitive to sudden movements, though. The briefing said they startle easily." The communications panel chimed. Frank pressed the button. "Miller here. Captain, Ambassador Carter. The Raxian ship has requested docking procedures. Are you ready to receive them?" "Yes, Ambassador. Docking Bay 4 is prepped, and the welcome team is standing by." "Excellent. Remember, this is a diplomatic mission first. These aren't military representatives, but they're equivalent of foreign affairs officials." Frank looked at the approaching ship. "Understood. And the welcome dinner is still scheduled?" "Yes. Chef Rivera has been working all week. He's prepared special dishes compatible with Raxian biology alongside our own cuisine. Breaking bread together is universal diplomacy, Captain." After ending the call, Frank turned to Laura. "Let's head down. I want to be there when they dock." They walked through the station's curved corridors. Delta was humanity's pride, a massive orbital platform built specifically for diplomatic encounters. Unlike the utilitarian designs of earlier stations, Delta featured wide spaces, gardens, and architectural elements from various Earth cultures. "Do you think they'll like us?" Laura asked suddenly. Frank glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Not sure like is what we're going for. Respect and cooperation would be enough. I've reviewed their medical files. Did you know they can live up to 300 years? The head of their delegation is apparently over 200. Makes sense to send the experienced ones," Frank replied as they entered an elevator. "I'd do the same." The docking bay was already filled with personnel. Security stood discreetly along the walls, while the diplomatic team was arranged in a semicircle near the airlock. Ambassador William Carter, a tall man with silver hair and immaculate posture, nodded at Frank as they entered. "All systems nominal," reported the docking controller. "They're following our guidance perfectly." Frank felt the subtle vibration through the floor as the magnetic clamps engaged. The external cameras showed the Raxian ship now securely attached to the station. "Pressure equalization in progress," announced a technician. Ambassador Carter straightened his jacket. "Remember everyone, no sudden movements. Speak clearly for the translators. This isn't just about trade agreements. This is about showing them that humans can be trusted partners." The airlock indicators shifted from red to green. Everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath as the door began to slide open. First contact with the Raxians was about to begin. Ambassador William Carter stood perfectly still as the airlock door completed its opening sequence. The room fell silent. 5 tall figures stood in the doorway, their blue-tinged skin reflecting the station lights. The Raxians were impressive creatures. They stood on 4 legs with a posture somewhat like Earth horses, but their upper bodies rose vertically from where their front shoulders would be. Their heads were elongated with large, intelligent eyes that blinked sideways. Most striking were the colorful frills extending from their necks, currently a calm blue-green shade. Zextarl, the lead diplomat, stepped forward first. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, the alien moved with careful grace. 3 smaller Raxians followed, while one larger one remained slightly behind. On behalf of Earth United and all humanity, I welcome you to Space Station Delta, Carter said with a formal bow. The translator device carried by one of Carter's assistants converted his words. After a moment, Zextarl responded, their words flowing through the translator in a pleasant neutral voice. The Raxian Confederation offers greetings. We approach this meeting with hopes for mutual benefit. The alien diplomat then tilted forward slightly, their version of a bow. The neck frills rippled slightly, shifting to a deeper blue color. Carter gestured to the humans beside him. May I present Captain Frank Miller, commander of this station, and Dr. Laura Jones, our chief medical officer. Frank stepped forward carefully and repeated the same bow Carter had performed. Welcome aboard Delta. Your safe arrival and comfort are my highest priorities. Laura followed with her own greeting. The Raxians responded to each with the same slight forward tilt. We have prepared quarters for your delegation, Carter continued. Then perhaps a tour of the station before you rest. We understand your biological rhythms may need adjustment to our day-night cycle. While Zextarl conversed with Carter, Frank noticed the largest Raxian scanning the room, its eyes moving methodically across each human present. Security assessment, he realized. Not so different from us after all. The group began moving through the station. Carter led the way, explaining the station's layout and purpose. The Raxians moved with deliberate steps, clearly affected by Earth's gravity settings, but managing well. This garden contains plants from various Earth regions, Carter explained as they entered a large open space filled with trees and flowering plants. We maintain it for both aesthetic and practical purposes. The Raxian's frills extended slightly, shifting to a yellow-green color that Frank hadn't seen before. This is pleasure, Zextarl explained through the translator. Among our people, shared plant spaces indicate trust and peace. Carter smiled. We feel similarly. Many human cultures consider gardens places of tranquility. As they continued the tour, Frank observed the aliens carefully. They seemed most interested in the environmental systems and agricultural areas, asking detailed questions about water recycling and plant cultivation. Your species grows your own nutrients, one of the smaller Raxians observed. This is wise. We're working toward complete sustainability, Laura explained. Though we're not there yet. The tour continued to the science labs, and then the observation deck with its stunning view of Earth. The Raxians stood in silence for several minutes, all 5 sets of frills shifting to a deep purple as they stared at the blue planet. Beautiful, Zextarl said simply. As they finished the main tour, Carter guided them toward their quarters. We've prepared a welcome event for this evening. Our chef, Paul Rivera, has created a special meal with options suitable for both our biologies. Zextarl's translator conveyed their response. We look forward to observing your nutritional customs. Excellent, Carter smiled. We'll send someone to escort you at 1900 hours. Until then, please rest and acclimate to the station. As the aliens settled into their quarters, Carter turned to Frank and Laura. So far, so good. Let's hope dinner goes just as smoothly. The Raxian delegation emerged from their quarters at exactly 1900 hours. They had changed from their travel garments into what appeared to be formal attire. Flowing fabric draped across their backs in rich purple and blue colors. Their neck frills seemed more pronounced now, displaying a calm teal color. Olivia Nguyen, Ambassador Carter's assistant, waited to escort them. She wore a standard diplomatic uniform with Earth United's emblem on the shoulder. Good evening, she said with a small bow. I hope you found your accommodations comfortable. Zextarl tilted forward. The gravity adjustments were most considerate. The moisture level is also acceptable. I'm glad to hear that, Olivia replied. If you'll follow me, the others are waiting in the observation dining hall. They walked through the curved corridors of the station, Several off-duty crew members they passed stopped and stared at the aliens with undisguised curiosity before remembering their manners. "Your species shows great interest in visual assessment," observed one of the smaller Raxians. "Yes," Olivia admitted. "Many humans have never seen a Raxian before. I apologize if it makes you uncomfortable." "Observation is natural," Zextarl responded. "We do the same." The observation dining hall was the station's most impressive space, a large room with one entire wall made of transparent material that looked out toward Earth. The planet hung like a blue jewel against the blackness of space, partially illuminated by the sun. Ambassador Carter greeted them at the entrance. "Welcome. Please, come in." Inside, the room had been arranged with two distinct seating areas, one with standard human tables and chairs, and another with special platforms designed based on Raxian physiological data. The lighting had been dimmed slightly to accommodate Raxian visual preferences. "We've prepared separate dining areas," Carter explained. "Your nutritional requirements are different from ours, but we thought we could still enjoy the experience together." The Raxians moved toward their designated area, examining the platforms with apparent approval. Dr. Kevin Martinez, the station's xenolinguist, approached with a data tablet. "With your permission, I'd like to confirm the compatibility of the food our chef has prepared. We've based it on the biological information your medical team shared, but we want to be certain." One of the Raxians, who wore a different colored drape than the others, stepped forward. "I am Nevelox, biological specialist. I will verify." While they consulted, Frank and Laura entered the room. Several other key station personnel followed. Everyone had been carefully briefed on proper etiquette around the Raxians. "The view is spectacular, isn't it?" Frank said, approaching Zextarl carefully. "It is most illuminating to see the homeworld of a species when first learning their nature," the alien diplomat replied. "Your planet has much water." "Yes, our oceans cover most of the surface." "Does your homeworld look different?" "More land. Less blue. More yellow and green." Their conversation was interrupted as Chef Paul Rivera entered the room. He pushed a cart with covered dishes and was accompanied by two assistants similarly wheeling food containers. "Good evening, everyone," Paul said with evident excitement. "I'm Paul Rivera, head chef for Station Delta." The Raxians' frills shifted slightly as they observed the new arrival. "For our honored guests," Paul continued, moving toward the Raxian area, "I've prepared nutrient plates based on your biological requirements. And for the humans, I've created dishes inspired by global Earth cuisine." Paul smiled broadly at the aliens. "I'm honored to prepare your evening meal. I hope you'll join us to share a meal together tonight." As the translator relayed his words, something unexpected happened. All five Raxians suddenly stiffened. Their neck frills extended fully and changed to a bright orange-red color. The smallest one backed away several steps. Zextarl made a sharp clicking sound that the translator didn't process. Ambassador Carter stepped forward, concern evident on his face. "Is something wrong?" The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The Raxians had formed a defensive circle, their once calm neck frills now fully extended and pulsing with alarming red-orange colors. Their large eyes had widened, and their breathing had become rapid and shallow. "What's happening?" Carter whispered urgently to Kevin Martinez, who was frantically checking his translation device. "I'm not sure," Kevin replied, confusion evident in his voice. He tapped rapidly on his tablet. Something triggered their threat response. The translator didn't flag any problematic terms. The humans in the room remained frozen, afraid that any movement might make the situation worse. Chef Paul had stopped in mid-step, the serving cart still between him and the aliens. Zextarl, still maintaining the appearance of diplomatic control despite obvious distress, spoke in clipped tones. The translator conveyed, "Clarify intent immediately. We were not informed of consumption rituals." Carter looked bewildered. "Consumption rituals? We're simply inviting you to dine with us, to eat food together." This statement only seemed to increase their agitation. The smallest Raxian was now edging toward the exit, its frills pulsing between orange and red. The biological compatibility has been verified, Carter continued, trying to sound reassuring. All dishes prepared for you contain only plant matter suitable for your digestive systems. You intend us to participate in mutual consumption, Zextarl demanded through the translator. This was not in briefing materials. Frank stepped forward very slowly. Ambassador, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding happening. The largest Raxian shifted position, moving between Zextarl and the humans. Its posture reminded Frank of security personnel preparing for threat intervention. Laura whispered to Olivia, "Get the cultural liaison team here now." Olivia nodded and discreetly touched her communication device, sending the alert. Carter tried again. Perhaps something was lost in translation. We are inviting you to eat your own food while we eat ours. We would be in the same room, enjoying our separate meals. The Raxians conferred among themselves, speaking rapidly in their own language. The translator couldn't keep up with their overlapping speech. After what seemed like an eternity, but was actually less than a minute, Zextarl addressed the humans again. Your chef spoke of sharing a meal. Explain this concept precisely. Kevin Martinez suddenly looked up from his tablet, eyes wide with realization. Sir, he said quietly to Carter, I think I understand the problem. What is it? Carter asked, keeping his voice calm despite the tension. The Raxian language has multiple meanings for their word that we translated as share. It can mean to experience something simultaneously, but it can also mean to divide something among participants. So, Carter was still confused. So when Chef Paul invited them to share a meal, the translator might have conveyed that we wanted to divide a single meal among all of us, and given that we're different species. Understanding dawned on Carter's face. They think we're suggesting cannibalism, that we want to eat them or have them eat us. Exactly, Kevin confirmed. In their cultural context, sharing food might have entirely different implications than in ours. Frank muttered under his breath, of all the first contact scenarios we prepared for, this wasn't one of them. Carter took a deep breath and addressed the aliens again. There has been a serious translation error. When humans speak of sharing a meal, we mean only that each person eats their own appropriate food while in the same room. No consumption of sentient beings was intended or will occur. The smallest Raxian's frills have begun to relax slightly, though they remained extended. We eat together as a social bonding activity, Carter continued carefully. It is a peaceful tradition among humans. You eat your food. We eat our food. No one eats anyone else. Zextarl's posture shifted slightly. Verification of this explanation is required, the alien stated through the translator. Kevin Martinez stepped forward cautiously, holding his tablet. May I show you something that might help explain? He asked, addressing Zextarl directly. The Raxian diplomat gave a short nod, frills still mostly extended but their color shifting from bright orange to a more muted yellow. Kevin tapped his screen several times and turned it toward the aliens. These are images from human history showing our tradition of eating together. The screen displayed a series of photographs. Families gathered around dinner tables, business lunches, celebration feasts from various cultures. As you can see, Kevin explained, humans gather to eat their own individual portions of food while in the company of others. We call this sharing a meal, even though we don't literally share the same food items. Nevelox, the Raxian biological specialist, moved closer to examine the images. Each being consumes separate nutrients. Yes, exactly, Kevin confirmed. We each eat our own food. The sharing refers to the experience, the time spent together, not the actual consumption of the same items. The Raxians conferred again among themselves, their frills gradually relaxing and shifting toward blue tones. Ambassador Carter decided to demonstrate. He walked slowly to the human dining table and sat down. Chef Paul, would you serve me a small portion, please? I want to show our guests what we mean. Paul nodded and carefully uncovered one of the dishes, serving a small amount onto a plate which he placed before Carter. "Now," Carter said, "I will eat my food. And if our guests wish, they can eat their food. We call this sharing a meal because we share the experience and the time together, not because we share the actual food." Zextarl watched intently as Carter took a small bite. After a moment, the alien diplomat seemed to reach a decision. "This is a significant cultural difference," Zextarl stated. "In Raxian society, consuming nutrients in the presence of others is unusual except among family groups." "I understand," Carter replied. "In human culture, eating together is considered a way to build trust and friendship. Among Raxians," Zextarl explained, "frills now almost back to their normal position. Offering to share food has historically indicated willingness to divide the flesh of a conquered enemy or sacrificial being." Several humans couldn't help but look shocked at this revelation. When translated directly, Zextarl continued, "Your invitation suggested a ritual consumption of sentient matter. This is practiced only in our most ancient historical accounts." Frank cleared his throat. "That explains the misunderstanding. I assure you, humans consider eating other sentient beings completely unacceptable." Laura stepped forward. "This is a perfect example of why these diplomatic meetings are so important. We learn about crucial cultural differences." The tension in the room was finally dissipating. The smallest Raxian had moved back to join the others, and their frills had returned to a more neutral blue color. "Would you still be comfortable dining in the same room with us?" Carter asked carefully. "Or would you prefer to eat separately, according to your customs?" Zextarl considered the question. "As diplomatic representatives, we are authorized to experience other cultural practices. We will proceed with your human custom, now that its meaning is clear." Relieved smiles broke out among the humans. Chef Paul, who had remained frozen through much of the exchange, finally relaxed. "Wonderful," Carter said. "And please know, if at any point our customs make you uncomfortable, you need only say so." Zextarl made a gesture that the humans hadn't seen before, something like a wave of one upper limb. Cultural misunderstandings are inevitable. It is how they are resolved that reveals the true nature of a species. "That," Carter said with a genuine smile, "is something we completely agree on." The dining arrangement proceeded with careful attention to the newly understood cultural differences. The humans and Raxians sat at their separate tables, but positioned so they could see and speak to one another. Chef Paul served the human dishes first, explaining each one briefly before moving to present the Raxian-compatible food. "For our guests," Paul said, his earlier enthusiasm tempered with newfound awareness, "I've prepared nutrient plates based on the specifications provided. The base is a fibrous root similar to those found on your homeworld, with mineral supplements that match your dietary requirements." Nevelox examined the food carefully before giving approval. The Raxians had a unique eating method. They used their upper limbs to break the food into small pieces which they then consumed without touching it again. They ate slowly and methodically. Ambassador Carter kept the conversation light during the meal. "We're curious about your impression of our solar system as you travel through it. Was there anything that particularly interested you?" Zextarl's frills rippled slightly before settling. "Your gas giant with rings, Saturn, you call it. It has 73 moons. This is unusual. Most systems we have studied have gas giants with fewer orbital bodies." "Interesting," said Dr. Martinez. "We've always been rather proud of Saturn's appearance, but I hadn't considered the number of moons might be exceptional." As they ate, Frank noticed the Raxians watching how the humans interacted with each other. The aliens seemed particularly interested in the casual way humans passed dishes or refilled each other's water glasses. "May I ask," Frank said, addressing Zextarl, "what is the equivalent of this kind of social gathering in your culture? How do Raxians build relationships if not through shared meals?" Zextarl set aside a piece of food before answering. "We gather for color displays. Our ancestors developed the neck frills as communication before we developed complex language. Families and close associates will gather to synchronize their frill patterns. This builds trust and understanding. Laura looked fascinated, like a visual conversation. That's remarkable. Yes, Zextarl confirmed. Much information is conveyed through color and pattern that words cannot express. As the meal progressed, the atmosphere became noticeably more relaxed. The smallest Raxian, who they learned was named Tolvex, even asked several questions about human food preparation techniques. Your species applies heat to many nutrients, Tolvex observed. This seems inefficient. Chef Paul smiled. Cooking does more than just make food safe to eat. It releases flavors, changes textures, and has become an art form in many human cultures. Art through nutrient modification, Tolvex repeated, frills showing a pattern that the humans couldn't interpret. Fascinating concept. Toward the end of the meal, Carter decided to address the earlier misunderstanding directly. I want to apologize again for the translation error. We should have been more thorough in our cultural briefing. Zextarl made the limb wave gesture they had seen earlier. Communication between different species will always contain challenges. In our historical records of first contacts with other species, there are similar misunderstandings. One resulted in a 70-year diplomatic freeze before being resolved. I'm glad we could clear things up more quickly, Carter replied with obvious relief. Your species shows flexibility of thought, Zextarl observed. This is valuable. Many beings cannot adjust rapidly to new information. As they finished their respective meals, Carter raised his water glass. On Earth, we have a tradition called a toast. We raise our drinks to express good wishes or hopes. Would you join me in raising your cups to successful communications and growing understanding between our peoples? The Raxians watched carefully, then mimicked the gesture with their own drinking vessels. To clear translations, Zextarl said, and peaceful gatherings. The humans smiled and repeated the phrase before drinking. The first real diplomatic bridge had been built. 2 days after the memorable dinner, the humans and Raxians gathered in the station's conference room to begin formal negotiations. The large oval table had been modified to accommodate both human chairs and Raxian standing platforms. Digital displays around the room showed data about both cultures and potential trade agreements. The atmosphere was notably different from their first meeting. The Raxians' frills displayed calm blue-green colors, and they positioned themselves closer to the humans than before. Zextarl even attempted a human-style handshake with Ambassador Carter, carefully using one upper limb to grasp Carter's hand. We have reviewed your proposed trade routes, Zextarl began once everyone was settled. There are possibilities worth exploring. Carter nodded. We're pleased to hear that. Earth ships would respect all Raxian protocols when traveling through your sectors. Dr. Kevin Martinez had spent the previous day working with Nevelox to improve the translation system. They had identified 14 key terms with potential for dangerous misinterpretation and created specialized definitions for them. Before we proceed, Kevin said, I suggest we review the updated translation protocols. We've added contextual markers for potentially problematic terms. Frank and Laura sat to one side, observing. While not directly involved in the negotiations, they had been asked to attend due to their successful interactions with the aliens. As Kevin explained the translation improvements, Laura leaned closer to Frank. They seem much more relaxed today, she whispered. Frank nodded. Amazing what a difference clear communication makes. The smallest Raxian, Tolvex, moved toward them. Your observation is accurate, Tolvex said, surprising them with its acute hearing. Our initial caution has been replaced by curiosity. I'm glad to hear that, Laura replied with a smile. Your chef has requested permission to observe our nutritional habits more closely, Tolvex continued. He wishes to create better compatible options for future Raxian visitors. That sounds like Paul, Frank said. He takes feeding people very seriously. The concept of food as more than basic nutrition continues to interest us, Tolvex admitted. In our society, we view eating as a private functional activity. The social aspects your species associates with it are novel. Laura considered this. It's interesting how different biological needs shape culture. For us, sharing meals has been central to human society for thousands of years. Family bonds, business deals, peace treaties, many important human connections happen around food. Yet you do not actually share the food itself. Tulvex noted, each consumes their own portion. The sharing is metaphorical. Exactly, Frank confirmed. Though sometimes we do share dishes, each person taking a portion from communal platters. Tulvex's frills shifted to a yellow color. This would be very unusual in our culture. Taking food from a shared source requires extreme trust. Across the room, Carter and Zextarl had begun discussing specific trade proposals. The Raxians were particularly interested in Earth's agricultural techniques, while humans sought access to Raxian star mapping data. Your species has mapped stellar phenomena we haven't encountered yet, Carter noted. This information would be invaluable for our exploration efforts. Zextarl made the now familiar Linwave gesture. Knowledge exchange benefits all. However, some regions are restricted due to agreements with other species. We respect that completely, Carter assured them. During a break in the formal discussions, Olivia approached with refreshments for the humans. She had also brought special nutrient drinks for the Raxians, carefully labeled and prepared according to Nevlox's specifications. As the Raxians consumed their drinks, Zextarl addressed the entire room. In our evolutionary history, sharing food sources often led to territorial conflicts. Eating separately but in sight of others demonstrates supreme trust. We now understand that for humans, eating together became a cornerstone of social development. It's fascinating how different our paths were, Carter replied. Yet here we are, Zextarl said, frills displaying a new pattern of blue and green ripples, consuming nutrients together while building connections between our worlds. Laura smiled at the elegant way the alien had phrased it. Despite their different biological needs and cultural practices, they had found common ground. The misunderstanding that had nearly derailed their first meeting had ultimately led to deeper cultural exchange. 6 months after the first meeting between humans and Raxians, Ambassador William Carter stood in the grand reception hall of the Raxian Central Diplomatic Complex on their homeworld of Raxus Prime. The gravity was lighter than Earth's, making him feel unusually buoyant, despite his formal attire. The hall was unlike any human structure. Its walls curved organically, made from a pearlescent material that shifted colors subtly with the changing light. Plants grew in carefully arranged patterns along the walls and ceiling, some flowering with bright colors, others displaying broad leaves in various shades of purple and blue. Carter had spent the last 3 months on Raxus Prime, the first human to live among the Raxians for an extended period. What had begun with that nearly disastrous dinner on Space Station Delta had developed into one of humanity's most successful interspecies relationships. The one-season anniversary approaches, Zextarl said, approaching Carter with the smooth gait characteristic of their species. The translator, now much improved, conveyed the words perfectly. Yes, Carter replied with a smile. 6 Earth months since our first meeting. A significant milestone. The Cultural Exchange Dictionary has been completed, Zextarl announced, their frills displaying proud blue-gold patterns. 27 linguists from both our species contributed. It contains 6,000 terms with potential for misinterpretation. An impressive achievement, Carter agreed. Dr. Martins tells me it's already being used as a template for communications with other species as well. The Raxian made the Linwave gesture that Carter had come to recognize as a sign of agreement or approval. Prevention of misunderstanding serves all. They moved together through the reception hall where diplomats from both worlds were gathering. 3 human ships now had permission to use Raxian trade routes, and agricultural experts from Earth had helped the Raxians develop new growing techniques for their colony worlds. I have been studying human customs, Zextarl said as they walked. For the anniversary celebration, I wish to incorporate elements from both our traditions. That's very thoughtful, Carter replied. What did you have in mind? A new ritual I call the separation meal. We will sit facing each other, each consuming our own appropriate foods while demonstrating mutual trust through proximity. Carter smiled broadly. That sounds perfect. A blend of both our customs. The celebration began as the double suns of Raxus Prime started to set, casting golden light through the transparent sections of the reception hall ceiling. Humans and Raxians gathered in the center where a special arrangement had been set up. Instead of separate tables, there was one large circular platform with alternating sections, some designed for humans to sit, others for Raxians to stand. The design allowed everyone to see each other while still maintaining the separate eating areas needed by Raxian custom. Frank Miller and Laura Jones had traveled from Earth for the occasion. They were now considered experts in Raxian relations and had been training other station commanders for future diplomatic missions. "Look how far we've come," Laura whispered to Frank as they took their places, "from them thinking we wanted to eat them to this." Frank nodded. The universe's greatest challenge isn't technology, it's understanding each other. Zextarl stood at their position and raised a drinking vessel. All around the circle, humans and Raxians did the same. 6 months ago, Zextarl began. A simple invitation to share a meal nearly ended our relationship before it began. Today, we celebrate not just our successful diplomatic and trade agreements, but our growing understanding of each other's ways. Carter raised his glass higher, to the separation meal, a new tradition born from a misunderstanding. The translator conveyed his words, and the Raxians' frills rippled with colors that the humans now recognize as amusement and agreement. As everyone began to eat their separate but equally enjoyed foods, Carter reflected on how easily it all could have gone wrong. One misinterpreted phrase could have set both species on a path of fear and distrust. Instead, that moment of confusion had become the foundation for something meaningful. "To think," Carter said to Zextarl as they finished their respective meals, "our greatest diplomatic challenge was simply inviting you to dinner." Zextarl's neck frills vibrated in their version of laughter. Perhaps the universe's greatest challenge is not reaching the stars, but understanding what others mean when they invite us to share them.